This is part 7 of a series on building a full-stack web application using Spring Boot and React, where you get to watch every line of code being written and a full app built from the scratch, step by step. If you're new, start watching from this video. Now we need to make a REST API call from our React application to our Spring Boot endpoint, both of which are running on our machines, right? Now the question is, where does this REST API call happen? If you look at the component hierarchy of what we've got so far, okay? So what we've got so far is we've got the app component at the top, which is what initializes our React application, like it's like the application component, application level component. And under that, you have the team page component. It shows up all the time right now, right? Team page component is literally in the app component. We're going to change it to use routing later, but for now it is just hard-coded inside app. So every time you load the page, team page component is showing up. Inside the team page component, we have the match detail card, and then we have the match, what do we call it? Small card? Yeah. Match small card, all right? Two components that we are embedding inside the team page component. And that's the reason why we are seeing this, right? We are seeing this particular thing. This whole thing is the app. Inside the app, everything that gets rendered is coming from the team page component. The team name is hard-coded into the team page component, all right? Which is this guy here, all right? This H1. And inside that, and below that, you have match detail card, which is showing these two things. And then you have the match small card 3 times, which is showing this particular thing 3 times. So this is our kind of like component hierarchy that we have going on. Now, where do we want to make an API call? Where do we want to fetch the data? Well, I'm going to fetch the data from the team page component itself. When the component loads, which is basically this guy, right? When this component loads, I'm going to make a REST API call, get the response, and then save it into this component's state. There are different ways you can do this. One other alternative is to basically create like this parent component, a wrapper component, which makes the REST API call, but it doesn't do any presentation work. It doesn't show anything in the UI. It just gets the data and makes it available. And then the team page component is going to be a child of that data fetching component. And then the team page component is going to have the data given to it by the data fetching component, right? It's kind of like the data fetching component is wrapping around this team page component, which kind of makes sense if you're in a very complex application. But for this particular one, I'm going to go with just making a REST API call from the team page component itself. But I do want to highlight that that's another practice that you can follow. So if you want to do this, feel free to create like this wrapper data fetch component, which gets the team data by making the REST API call. But right now what I'm going to do is I'm going to make that call from the team page component. I'm going to do that using effects, all right? I'm going to call the use effect function, which is basically going to make that call to that REST API, okay? So if you're new to React, again, effects are a way for you to make these side effects happen, right? You want to do something when the page loads. Well, this is a way to do that. Sorry, a component loads, right? This is a component which is loading. You want to do something when the component loads. It's a side effect of the component loading. Well, you can use effects for it. You want to do something when a particular value in the component changes. Well, you can do use effects for that too. So how do you start using use effects? I'm going to close this thing here because we don't need that. So I'm going to start by importing use effects from React, just like we imported the React thing here. I'm going to use effect. It's use effect, not use effects, okay? So I'm going to import this, and now I can call use effect with any side effect that I need in my component, all right? So before I return this JSX snippet, I'm going to call use effect over here, right? So I'm going to say use effect, and then here I can pass in a function that needs to execute when this component loads, okay? And this requires a function. I'm going to pass a function over here, and then the second argument is an array, which is basically when you want the use effect to run, right? I want this to run when the component loads, which is what this empty array is over here, okay? And now what's going to happen is when this component loads, it is going to call this function. Now inside this function, I need to make a REST API call, okay? So there is no specific way to make REST API calls in React. You can basically use any normal way of making REST API calls. If you're using like a library like Axios, you can do that, or you can just use fetch, which is like the native browser way of making calls. So I'm going to use fetch over here. So Before I do that, I'm going to kind of wrap this in a function, like an async function, so that I can use await. I cannot mark the function that I pass to use effect as async because it's not allowed. So what I do instead is define a function over here. I'm going to call this const fetch matches is an async function, which is going to fetch the matches. And then at the end of this, I'm going to call fetch matches. Okay, so again, it's like a function inside a function, but don't let that confuse you. All I'm doing is inside use effect, I'm passing a function which needs to execute when the component is loaded. All right, what am I passing inside the function? What's the body of the function? Is basically defining a new function and then executing it. It's basically whatever you're putting inside this function now is going to get executed when the component loads. Like, why this indirection? We need this because the function that you pass to use effect does not support async. You cannot have an async function here. So that's the reason why I create an async function and then execute it, so that the function itself, which wraps it, doesn't have to be async. All right. So here, what do I need to do? I need to basically just make a fetch and pass that URL. All right. So I'm going to do a const response equals fetch of this URL that I need to call. Okay, and what is this? What's this URL? I'm just going to copy this guy. I'm copying the URL that I made a sample request to. It's basically going to get the Delhi Capital's information. It is hard coded right now, yes, but that is fine for now because we're going to be changing that to get values from like from a query param or from a path param later. You can use the router for it. But for now, we're just hard coding the team name there. Okay, so now I have this. I'm going to do await because fetch returns a promise. Okay, so this is promise-based API. So fetch returns a promise. I'm going to use await, and I can use that now because I've defined this function to be async. All right, now that I have this response, I'm going to get the data from that response. .json is the function to call to get the actual response. And now here, what I'm going to do is I'm going to do a console.log of data. Okay, now if I were to look at this now and open developer tools, look at the console, well, now we have a problem. It's giving me a CARS issue. It's saying the cross origin request was blocked. This is basically because the URL, the domain of the URL that we're calling, which is localhost:8080, is different from the domain of this web page that we're using, which is localhost:3000, right? So this is basically cross domain. It's one domain page calling a request, calling an API, which is in another domain. The browser blocks it immediately. So there are a couple of ways we can handle this. The easiest way to do this is by sticking a cross origin annotation on top of your controller, Spring controller, so that you don't get that error, right? I'm just going to do that for now, all right? So I'm going to go to my Spring controller, which is, what's it called? It's called team controller.java, and I'm going to stick this at cross origin annotation, right? When I do that, then it is going to allow other domains, pages from other domains, to make a call to this API. It basically puts things on the header so that the browser feels like, yeah, it's okay. The API seems to be okay with another domain, calling that API. So that's what we're doing over here. I don't know if my endpoint is running, so I'm just going to run this again. So my Spring MVC is running, and now I'm going to close this and go back to my my JavaScript, and this is my the team page component, which is making this call. And now I'm going to try refreshing this again. And now here it seems to be working fine. Now here you see the data seems to have loaded. The logo is defined but never used. This is from app.js. I can remove that. It's just an alert that we're getting. We don't need this. But what's important is to see this value, right? You see this? You were getting the data from the REST API call. Okay, it's showing up in all its glory. We have the team name, we have the last few matches that have happened, you see here, and each match itself has all of the data. So we are able to make a REST API call from our team component. Now what I can do is, since we have this data over here, I can set it to a state. Okay, so I can make it available as a state on the component, and then the JSX can refer to the state and show that there. Okay, so rather than have this value be all hard-coded stuff, it can look up the value from the state. So the way that works is this thing, after it fetches the data, it is going to populate the component state with this data, and then the JSX over here is going to use that state, is going to read that state and show that over here. Okay, now how do I do that? Well, the way to do this is by using the use state hook. And I get that from React. Again, just like you use the use effect, I'm going to use the use state hook. Okay, and I can initialize the state. I can say, okay, I expect this state to contain team information. Okay, so you can initialize that state. So I do something like this. I can say const and an array team, and then set team equals use state. Okay, so there are a couple of things here. One is I'm giving this state a name. I'm going to say this is team information, and then I'm giving it the function that I need to call to set it. All right, so whatever I call to this, I can say set team. Now I've defined this function. I'm going to get that from the use state hook. Now I can say set team, and then I can pass it an object, and that object is going to be set to this team state. All right, I'm not going to write to this team state directly. I'm going to call the set team method to set that state. This is how it works. This is how states work in React. So now instead of console logging the data, I'm going to do set team of data. All right, so I'm using this to set state. Now let me save this. There should be no change really. Oh, okay. Team is assigned a value never used, but we're going to use this in a bit. Now here, what I'm going to do is, instead of hard coding the name, I'm going to use team dot, what's it called? Team name. Okay, so I'm going to do team dot team name. I'm using this curly brace because this is what lets React know that this is actually a JavaScript snippet that needs to add, not hard coded stuff. Okay, if I don't use curly brace, it is going to literally show team dot team name in the UI. That's not what I want. I'm going to use a curly brace, so I'm going to tell React to evaluate this thing. Now if I save it, I'm going to get the name of the team that I've fetched over here. Now if I were to change this to something else, all right, let's say I change this to Rajasthan Royals, and I save, it is going to fetch that from the API, okay, and then it is going to populate that thing instead, which is why team name is coming here. Right now, yes, it is not ideal because I'm still hard coding the team name in the URL over here, right? So this URL is still hard coded with the team name. It's not ideal. It should basically pick it up from the route, right? Some URL that I pass in the page URL, it should pick that up and then show that. But that's fine. We'll get there next. So now I have a REST API call that's being made to our Spring MVC API, getting the response, and then showing it. This is fairly easy, right? It's not a lot of stuff happening over here. As long as you understand state and effects in React, this is fairly easy. All right. If you're not familiar with this, drop a comment and let me know. Hey, Kaushik, create a tutorial for this thing, and I'm happy to explain how this works. A React tutorial is overdue from me for a long time already. I understand that. Okay, so we have displayed the team name. Now what's left to do is to display match information in all of these things. Okay, let's say match small card. I want to display one match small card for each match. This is also fairly simple. Let me actually get rid of this stuff. What I need to do is get team.matches, which is what is, let me refresh this. Let me actually go to the network tab here and show this information. Okay, there's an error here. I think I messed something up. What did I do? Okay, it's telling me team is undefined because I don't have an initial state for this thing. I can't do a .team name of undefined. So here is the solution for it. When you define a state and say, okay, I need team to be a state, and I use state for it, you can pass in like the initial value, like the default value. I'm just going to pass in an empty object here so that becomes the initial value. So when I do that, then it is not going to be undefined when the page loads, all right? So this is going to be an empty object and team name is going to be undefined, but that's fine. I'm not going to call a reference on an undefined object. So it's basically to prevent those kind of errors. I'm setting it to be an empty object so that I don't get undefined errors. All right, so you can notice here that this is going on and it's making a call all the time. And the reason for that is that I am asking this use effect to happen no matter what, right? If anything changes, I want the use effect to happen. This is going to result in an infinite loop. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to pass a second argument to use effect, which is an empty array, all right? This is what's referred to as a dependency list, okay? It's basically when you want this use effect to be called. By using an empty array, I'm basically saying call this only on the first page load. Okay, so if I were to refresh the page now, it's going to call only once and it is not going to keep calling again and again, right? Because when you do use effect by default, you're basically saying call this when anything changes. Okay, and in use effect, you're basically fetching data and then putting it to the state. So you're actually causing something to change. And that's going to, guess what? It's going to trigger this again. It's going to call and update again. And it's going to be like, oh, now I need to call use effect again. So that's the reason why you have an infinite loop. So a couple of changes I made here. First, I used this empty object so that the team state is initialized with an empty object. It doesn't result in all the undefined errors that we looked at earlier. And the second thing is I'm passing an empty array as a second argument to use effect, which is basically saying call this use effect only when one of these things inside this array changes. At this point of time, it's an empty array, so it basically initializes use effect only when the component loads for the first time and doesn't do anything after that. Okay, so we've got this going on. Now the next thing we need to do is pass this data to the match detail card and to the match small card so that they can do their thing. Okay, so you have team.matches, which is basically an empty array. Now what I need to do is basically loop through team.matches, and for each team.match entry, I'm gonna have to render match small card. So I'm gonna get rid of this, and then I'm gonna do let's see, team.matches dot for each, or maybe I can just do a map. This is a common practice, by the way. If you want to render a component for as many times as there are entries in an array, you basically do a map where you map from that the array element to the JSX snippet of that component. So it's basically going to take each element and then render the JSX snippet in place. So in this particular case, for this particular match, I need to render the match small card. Okay, if I just do this, it is still going to render match small card as many times because we have 4 matches, right? So it is going to render match small card 4 times. But what we want is for the match small card to show match information. Okay, so I'm going to pass this as an argument. I'm going to say match equals and then pass that match information over here. Right now, doesn't do anything because I'm not accepting this argument, but I can actually do something with this. I'm going to go to match small card over here, and I'm going to accept the match argument as a parameter. Okay, this is the object destructuring notation. I'm basically saying I'm going to get an object here, which is the parameter, and then match is a property on that parameter. So here what I'm going to do is I'm going to say match dot team1. Of course, I'm to put this in curly brace. Team1 versus, and then match dot team2. Okay, so now I'm showing the match information in the match small card. Okay, of course, this is Rajasthan Royals team, so it is basically going to get all the matches where Rajasthan Royals has played. Okay, and I do that by basically sending the match information, each match information into a match small card, passing the match argument over here, and then in my match small card, I'm accepting the params object and taking the match property out of it, and then using that in my JSX, which is what is showing this. I can do something similar for the match detail card as well. I can accept the match argument in the params object, and then I can specify the match details, and I can do something similar to what this is doing over here. All right, and I'm going to make this NH4 as well so that it kind of stands out a bit. Not a paragraph tag. Okay, oh, of course, I need to pass that as an argument. I'm not doing that over here, right? So I need to say match equals, and then I'm going to do match equals team dot matches of 0. Okay, which is what I need to do. Now, if I press save, it is going to probably result in a match is undefined error, because the initial state that we have, we don't have matches there. So in my initial state, I'm again going to have a matches defined as an empty array, so that this is not going to fail. Okay, so if I were to save this and refresh, it still fails. What's going on here? Match is undefined. This is over here. Match.team. This is a match detail card. So here I'm going to specify if not match, then I'm going to return null. Basically saying, hey, if whatever I'm passing over here is basically empty, if match is undefined, then don't return any JSX, return null, which is basically the React way of saying don't do anything, right? There's no op, nothing that needs to be done over here. So now this works fine. So this is the latest match, and then here are all the 4 matches that we are returning. But this is not what we want. We want the latest match to show up as the bigger tile, the match detail card, and the other matches to show up over here. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to not iterate over all the matches. Instead, I'm going to just remove the first one. Okay, so I'm going to do a slice of 1.map. So it's basically going to remove the first one. It's basically 1 to n, and it is going to render for those. So this is more like it. The first match shows up in the match detail card, and then the subsequent matches, the subsequent 3 matches, show up in this particular thing. All right, I hope that's making sense. Again, to summarize, what I'm doing is I'm creating, move this over here. I'm creating state using useState, and I'm saying team is a state and setTeam is the way to populate that state. And now I'm making a call over here in the use effect and saying, okay, when the component loads, which is this empty array, I want fetch matches to be called. What does fetch matches do? It's making a call to a hard-coded URL, and whatever response comes, it is setting to the state, which is what I've defined over here. Okay, and in my JSX, I'm showing this JSX, which is showing this HTML. I'm using team.teamName, which is basically plucking from this state over here. And then I am rendering the match detail card with the first of the matches in the team object. And then I am going to the rest of the matches, which is basically matches.slice of 1, which is going to be like, it ignores the 0th element, and from the first element on to n, it is mapping each element to this JSX snippet, which is basically match detail card, and each of those matches it's going to pass over here. Now both the match detail card and the match small card is basically using this match object to show something. Well, mostly it is match.team1 versus match.team2, which is what you are seeing over here. Okay, so now we can tweak this a little bit more. So I'm going to commit this React app with theme page. I'm going to save this state with this whole thing working. And next, I'm going to next thing I'm going to do is add some routing over here, right? Did it save earlier? I don't know. We'll see. Okay, so this should do it. Now I'm going to add some routing next.